Lord, teach us to see people not by the clothes they wear or the titles they hold, but by the kindness they show and the truth they live. Let love grow where it is sincere. Let the heart lead where status cannot. Amen. The camera opens to the grand staircase of a Beverly Hills mansion. Light streams through tall windows, cutting across marble floors. Footsteps echo sharply. Christian storms down the steps, face pale, jaw clenched. His phone drops from his hand, screen still lit with a message he never wanted to read. His breath is shallow. His world, one that once glittered with reputation and careful appearances, feels like it's collapsing. In the next room, laughter dies behind a closed door. Christian's fiancée, Vanessa, stands frozen, caught off guard by the sudden silence. Her secret has just been exposed, and Christian has heard enough to know, trust doesn't live here anymore. He walks past the crowd, ignoring the confused looks from guests, staff, even his father. Through the French doors he steps into the conservatory, a place usually filled with calm. But today the air is different. There, by the ivy-covered wall, someone else stands in quiet stillness. Kate. She isn't dressed in silk or pearls, no makeup artist touched her face. But she's holding a watering can, gently tending to a rose that hasn't bloomed in weeks. Her presence doesn't demand attention, yet it keeps it. Their eyes meet. No words yet, just stillness. Her face softens with concern, not curiosity, no judgment, just presence. Christian says nothing at first. He watches her brush dirt from her hands. Her uniform is simple, but her dignity? Immeasurable. He steps forward, voice low. Have you ever trusted someone, and realized they never really saw you at all? Kate doesn't flinch, she doesn't pry, she simply looks up at him, hands calm, eyes steady. Yes, she says quietly, but I learned something. The people who see you clearly? They don't need to be told who you are, they just know that moment, brief, unscripted, is the beginning of everything. Kate lowers her eyes, sensing the weight in Christian's voice. She doesn't need to ask what happened. Pain speaks its own language. Stillness settles between them. She starts to turn away, trying to offer him privacy, but Christian takes one slow step forward. His voice, cracked and low, cuts through the quiet. Do you ever feel like the only time you're truly seen is by someone who's not even supposed to be looking? Kate pauses. She turns back slowly, gently setting the watering can down. Their eyes meet again, closer now. No crowd, no family name, no polished conversations to hide behind. Just two people standing in the middle of what's real. He's the son of wealth and tradition. She's the maid who tidies what the rich leave behind. But in this moment, none of that matters. Yes, Kate finally says. But sometimes, that's the only kind of gaze worth returning. Christian almost smiles. Almost. His hand moves just barely, an instinct to reach out, but he stops himself. They're inches apart, heart speaking what lips don't dare say. Their fingers brush. For a second, just one, it feels like time listens. Have you ever loved someone who was way out of your league, but saw the real you? What if everything you've ever worked for clashed with the only person who ever made you feel alive? Would you risk it all, for someone who sees your soul? Nestled among tall hedges and protected by a wrought iron gate, the Whitmore estate stood like a palace carved out of California pride, with its cream-colored stonework, twin fountains, and a winding driveway paved with imported Italian tiles. It gave no room for modesty. Every corner of the property, sprawling gardens, hand-painted ceilings, golden chandeliers, whispered the word excess. Christian Whitmore was raised within its walls, a product of generational wealth and iron expectations. His grandfather had built the family name through investments in oil and land development. His father expanded the fortune into tech and real estate, cementing the Whitmores as one of Beverly Hills' most respected and feared names. Christian never knew a life outside this estate. From the moment he could walk, his routines were tailored: French tutors, classical piano lessons, fencing at 5, formal etiquette by 7. His bedroom wasn't a room, it was a suite. His closet didn't just have suits, it had tailored collections labeled by event type: gala, boardroom, fundraiser, brunch. Everything was labeled, controlled, polished. He grew up to be the kind of man who mastered silence in business meetings, understood power plays behind champagne glasses, and shook hands with politicians like he'd been born in Congress. But Christian's eyes often drifted toward the windows, past the French curtains and manicured hedges. He wondered about the people outside the gates. What did joy feel like when it wasn't earned through applause? What did conversation sound like when no one was trying to impress? At the dinner table his father spoke of deals and mergers. His mother, eloquent and regal, hosted the city's elite, ensuring appearances were always spotless. Vanessa, his fiancée, poised, polished, perfect, spoke of art galleries and charity auctions. And Christian? He spoke less, listened more, wondered more. He was groomed to take over his father's empire. He knew how to run the estate, sit on boards, secure international contracts, and represent the Whitmore name with flawless finesse. But he didn't know what it felt like to be known. His days were curated, not lived. His world, rich in luxury, starved for truth. In South Los Angeles, the morning didn't begin with soft harp alarms or espresso machines. It started with the hum of traffic, the crow of restless roosters 2 streets over, and the sound of hope rising with the sun. Kate's alarm clock was a beat-up radio that played gospel at 5:15 a.m., sharp. The sound wasn't polished, it crackled, but it never failed to remind her of why she got up early every morning. She stretched slowly, whispered a prayer beneath her breath, and reached for her neatly folded uniform hanging on the back of her door. Her bedroom was small but tidy. A twin bed pushed against the wall, a shelf lined with devotionals and used textbooks, and photos of her younger brother Elijah taped beside the mirror. Their mother's smile smiled down on them in all of the pictures, warm and wide, even when life wasn't easy. Kate had grown up fast. Their mother worked 2 nursing shifts most days, and when she wasn't home, Kate was the one preparing dinner, checking Elijah's homework, folding laundry, and walking him to school. She never resented it. Family meant everything to her. They lived in a small duplex nestled between a barbershop and a laundromat, just 5 blocks from the church where her late grandmother once sang every Sunday. The neighborhood knew Kate. At the corner store, Mr. Darnell saved her favorite brand of tea. Miss Lita from the hair salon always asked about her job and Elijah's grades. Despite the graffiti and occasional sirens at night, the area had something Beverly Hills didn't: community. Faith was the thread that tied Kate's life together. She didn't wear it loudly, but it lived in her choices. Every morning before leaving the house, she stood by the kitchen sink, closed her eyes, and asked God to help her remain humble, focused, and strong. "Let me work with grace today," she'd whisper. Her uniform was pressed the night before, shoes polished, hair tied neatly. She didn't have much, but she respected what she had. She took the early metro train across town, switching lines at Wilshire before boarding the route that climbed toward the manicured hills of the wealthy. Most mornings she rode in silence, earbuds in, eyes looking out the window. She watched the neighborhoods change, walls getting taller, streets getting quieter, as she approached the estate. By the time she reached the mansion, it was still early. Housekeeping staff arrived through the back entrance, clocked in with quiet nods, and dispersed into their assigned zones. Kate's zone was the West Wing that week: dining hall, second-floor guest rooms, study hallways, and sometimes the service kitchen. She moved with purpose, not to rush, but with a quiet rhythm passed down from women who knew how to keep a household running with dignity. She didn't try to make herself invisible, she simply did her work with care. To her, the job wasn't just about money, it was a step towards something bigger. Someday, she'd finish her associate's degree, maybe open a small interior cleaning business, or study hospitality management. But for now, this was where she served, and she would serve well. Each floor she cleaned, each silverware she polished, was not a symbol of servitude, it was a stone laid in the path of her future. She wasn't just Kate, the maid. She was Kate from South LA. Kate, big sister. Kate, child of faith. Kate, the girl who knew where she was going, even if no one else saw it yet. The first day Kate entered the Whitmore estate, she was 30 minutes early. She stood just outside the iron service gate, holding her small lunch bag and a water bottle. A cool breeze passed through her coat as she looked up at the towering house. It didn't intimidate her, it humbled her. "Let me walk through these halls without shrinking," she murmured to herself. When she stepped inside, the air was different. Everything smelled faintly of polished wood, expensive candles, and cold marble. The hallway floors were spotless, the ceilings high enough to echo footsteps. Uniforms were crisp, Voices were low, and every move seemed choreographed. The head of staff, Mrs. Hargrove, briefed her with precision. Tasks were delegated with calm urgency. Kate nodded respectfully, took her cleaning supplies, and began in the second-floor guest lounge. As she polished the glass table near the window, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned slightly and saw him, Christian Whitmore. He wasn't dressed like the men on television dramas, no loud suits or heavy colognes, just a white dress shirt, sleeves casually rolled, top button undone. He walked with silent confidence, holding a folder in one hand and a mug in the other. Their eyes met briefly. Kate offered a polite nod and lowered her gaze, continuing to clean. Christian hesitated for a second, then walked past. But he noticed something. Unlike the others, she didn't scramble or flinch. She didn't force a smile or look away too quickly. She simply acknowledged him with calm, respectful presence. It wasn't the last time he saw her that day. Later he passed her in the hallway where she was straightening a table runner. She moved with ease, focused but not rushed. Again he paused. Something about her presence unsettled him. Not in a bad way, but in a way that made him think. She wasn't like the women he'd grown up with, always primping, always smiling for someone's attention. Kate moved as if she belonged, not because of name or status, but because she respected herself. Christian didn't say a word that day. But the way he noticed her, closely, quietly, was the beginning of something even he couldn't name yet. It didn't take long for the differences between Kate's world and the Whitmores to show themselves. In the main dining room, Kate once overheard Vanessa joking with a friend about the help mixing up salad forks. No names were mentioned, but the air changed when Kate entered the room moments later. During formal brunches, staff remained invisible unless summoned. Kate obeyed every instruction, yet her presence never melted into the background the way others did, not because she tried to stand out, but because she carried a grace that couldn't be overlooked. Some staff whispered about her behind her back, how she acted different, too focused, like she was studying the house instead of just cleaning it. But Mrs. Hargrove noticed her punctuality, her detailed towel folds, her immaculate tray setups. She said nothing but started assigning Kate to more delicate areas. Silverware drawers, crystal glass cabinets, piano rooms. Christian too watched the class division play out. He noticed how guests sometimes dismissed servers mid-sentence, how some of the board members ignored Kate completely, as if her uniform made her invisible. But when Kate moved through the hallways, she didn't carry shame, she carried purpose. There were no protests, no outbursts, just quiet dignity that held weight. And Christian felt it. He began questioning the things he'd grown up believing were normal. Why should wealth mean superiority? Why did those born with less get treated like they belonged less? He didn't yet know the answers, but each time he passed Kate, each time her eyes met his with calm acknowledgement, not fear, not flirtation, just presence, he grew more curious. Not just about her, but about everything he'd been raised to never question. The mansion's back garden had once been a jewel of the estate, a living mural of imported roses, climbing ivy and sculpted hedges. But over time, as the Whitmores turned their focus to social functions and boardrooms, the garden became a forgotten corner, left to weather and wilt. Gardeners trimmed the front hedges for appearances, but no one touched the far side of the estate anymore, not until Kate arrived. It was her third week working at the Whitmore estate. Her chores rotated between rooms, but she'd noticed the rose garden through the glass windows near the East Wing Hall. The flowers were sagging, thirsty for care. Their petals clung weakly to browning stems. Something in Kate stirred. On her lunch break, when others rested in the staff lounge or scrolled through their phones, she walked barefoot onto the soft grass, uniform crisp, hands empty but willing. She didn't ask permission. She simply rolled up her sleeves and knelt beside the nearest bush. She started by pulling weeds, quiet and focused. Her fingers were gentle but firm, as if each plant mattered. The sun bore down on her head, but she worked steadily, speaking softly to herself, not out loud but in her mind, little prayers, little affirmations. It reminded her of Saturdays back home, tending her grandmother's backyard with her little brother Elijah. She came again the next day, then the day after that. She borrowed tools from the unused shed, clippers dulled with age, gloves a size too big. She cleaned them first, then used them with care. Every trimmed branch, every revived patch of soil felt like restoring something long forgotten, Her back ached sometimes, her knees stained from dirt. But it was the kind of work that filled the soul, not just the schedule. By the second week, small changes appeared. Buds began to reopen. Color returned to the bushes like breath returning to lungs. The flowers no longer drooped in defeat. They stood again. But what stood out most was Kate herself. She moved through the space like it belonged to her, not in ownership, but in purpose. She didn't just work. She nurtured. She didn't know it, but she wasn't alone. From the second-story study window, Christian noticed. At first it was by accident. He glanced out while reviewing paperwork. But then he started looking intentionally, curious, quietly drawn. Who was this woman who gave life to things others overlooked? She wasn't loud. She didn't seek attention. But her presence was impossible to ignore. To the Whitmores, the garden had become a forgotten patch of earth. To Kate, it was a sanctuary. It started with glances. Christian often lingered in the upstairs study, the one with the wide window that overlooked the side garden. He told himself he was reviewing documents, preparing for a real estate strategy meeting or checking projections for one of his father's ongoing projects. But his eyes drifted more often than he cared to admit. Below, Kate moved among the roses like a quiet caretaker. She never hurried, she never complained. She didn't use fancy tools or expect praise. She came with a small cloth tucked into her apron, a pair of reused gloves, and a heart set on bringing color back into a garden others had forgotten. One late morning he found himself outside, walking toward the conservatory after a call had frustrated him. The conversation with a potential investor had drained him. Superficial talk of market dominance. Nothing human, nothing honest. He paused near the stone path by the rose garden, saw her crouched beside the second hedge. The sunlight kissed her face, highlighting a delicate sheen of sweat above her brow. Her hands moved gently through the soil, patting it back around a base she had just watered. She didn't see him at first. He cleared his throat, not loud, just enough. Kate looked up, no fear in her eyes, no panic. Didn't mean to interrupt, he said, hands in his pockets. Kate stood, brushing her palms together. You didn't. I was just finishing. Christian nodded toward the rose bush. That one looks better than it did last week. Kate glanced at it. It still has some life in it, just needed a little attention. Their eyes held for a beat too long. You do this on your break? He asked. She nodded. It helps me think. Christian smiled faintly. Funny. I come out here to stop thinking. Kate returned the smile, small, respectful, but warm. She didn't flirt, she didn't play coy, she simply offered him presence. And that, more than anything, struck him. From that day forward he made more coincidental appearances near the garden. Sometimes, he'd ask how the soil was coming along. Other times, he'd drop comments about his childhood memories of the garden, trying to sound casual. Once, he even offered her a glass of lemonade from the inside kitchen, not as a command, but a gesture. You don't have to, she said that day, accepting the glass. I know, he replied. That's why I did. They started to exchange more than words. Silence between them wasn't awkward, it was full. Christian wasn't sure when he'd started looking forward to seeing her. It wasn't about novelty, it wasn't about beauty, though she was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or clothes. It was something in her steadiness. Something in how she looked at him like a man, not a name. Kate, on her part, remained careful. She didn't overstep, she didn't seek his attention. But when he came near, she didn't shrink either. She answered his questions with honesty, listened when he spoke, and offered truths that were rare in his world. What grew between them wasn't loud, it was subtle. Like roots forming beneath freshly turned earth, deepening before blooming. Whispers move faster than footsteps in large houses. By the second week of Christian's increasingly visible presence near the garden, staff began to notice. It wasn't overt. He never lingered too long, he never touched her. But the frequency, the soft exchanges, the way his gaze softened when she spoke, those were things observant eyes could not miss. In the laundry room, Teresa from housekeeping mentioned it first. You seen the way Mr. Christian be hovering by the rose hedge lately? Another worker chuckled. Man got a whole estate to walk through, and he always lands by Kate's patch of dirt. Kate overheard them once but said nothing. She folded napkins with perfect corners and kept her gaze low. But her heart beat a little quicker. Back in the main house, Vanessa began noticing too. It started with missed lunches, then half-finished conversations. Christian, who once sat beside her at events with obliging smiles, now seemed distracted. He didn't argue, he didn't pull away physically. But something in his presence changed, like his mind was elsewhere even when his body was near. At a Saturday brunch, she tried to engage him with talk of a new exhibit opening at the Getty. Maybe we could go together, like we used to. Christian nodded but didn't look up from his phone. We'll see. She followed his gaze. His screen was dark. He wasn't scrolling, he was just lost. Later that afternoon she walked past the sunroom and saw him outside, leaning against the railing watching someone. Kate. She was trimming the edge of a bush, back turned. She wasn't posing or trying to be seen. Vanessa narrowed her eyes. That night she made a pointed comment while they dressed for a family dinner. So, you've taken a sudden interest in gardening? Christian shrugged. Not really, just needed fresh air. Vanessa smiled tightly. It's interesting. You never liked roses, said they felt artificial. He didn't respond. She didn't press, not then. But seeds of suspicion had been planted. And in households like the Whitmores, nothing bloomed faster than gossip once it took root. It wasn't confrontation that marked Christian's shift, it was subtle resistance. During a Monday staff meeting about the upcoming charity event, his father made a passing comment while reviewing the guest hospitality schedule. Let's rotate kitchen duties that day, keep it smooth, and let's make sure our more visible staff represent the house well. Assign Hargrove to the west entry. Maybe reassign the South LA girl elsewhere. Optics. Christian's brow lifted. Kate? He asked evenly. His father didn't look up. Yes. The new one, she's the reason the garden looks like it did 5 years ago, Christian said. I'd rather have her near the East Wing patio. It'll be photographed. His father waved a dismissive hand. Fine, do what you want. That was the first time he'd spoken up for her in a staff setting, not protectively, but professionally. Framed as logic, but driven by something deeper. Kate didn't know about it, but later that week, she noticed her task list had changed. Instead of the laundry wing, she was placed closer to the conservatory. Instead of being shifted away from guest view, she was trusted with setup placements near the outdoor lounge. During setup, one of the younger staff members muttered under her breath. Guess being pretty and quiet pays off when you got the right eyes on you. Kate froze. She didn't turn around. She didn't defend herself. She finished adjusting the linen placement and kept moving. But Christian, who had entered quietly behind them, heard every word. He walked past Kate without pause, but turned slightly toward the whispering maid. Gossip isn't part of your job description. Neither is envy. If it continues, I'll let Mrs. Hargrove know. His tone was even, not loud, but sharp enough to sting. The staff member's face flushed. Yes, sir. Christian didn't wait for a response. He walked on. Kate caught his eye a few minutes later while arranging centerpieces. Their exchange was brief. No smile, no thank you, but something passed between them. It wasn't about defending her honor, it was about respect. In a world where women like Kate were easy to ignore, Christian chose to see her. And that choice was changing everything. Tuesday mornings at the Whitmore estate didn't begin with alarms. They began with expectations. Christian sat at the end of a 12-foot mahogany boardroom table inside Whitmore Holdings' downtown high-rise. The room overlooked the Los Angeles skyline. Sharp, glassy, and sterile. 12 men in tailored suits filled the seats, each one older than him, each one watching. His father, Harold Whitmore, sat at the head of the table, arms crossed, expression unreadable. A chart of projected earnings flickered across the monitor. Numbers. Growth. Expansion. Stability. But Christian barely heard the analyst's voice. He was supposed to lead this room one day, supposed to speak fluently in the language of assets and long-term real estate strategies. He knew the language. He had studied it since he was a boy. Stock markets over storybooks, mentorship dinners instead of birthdays. Christian, his father said mid-presentation. Your thoughts on the Brentwood acquisition? Christian blinked back into focus. I think the numbers work, but the timing's wrong. That property's value has plateaued. A low murmur moved around the table. Harold leaned forward. Plateau doesn't mean dead. No, Christian said, but short-term gain could blind us from the long-term liability. A pause. Then one of the senior partners chuckled and said, He's starting to sound like you, Harold. The room relaxed. Harold didn't smile but nodded slowly. Still, Christian felt the pressure around his collarbone like a rope he hadn't asked for. Every word in these meetings had weight, every opinion measured. He wasn't just being groomed for succession, he was being trained for performance. "You're doing fine," his father said, "but don't second guess. This world doesn't have patience for hesitation." Christian nodded. "Yes, sir." But he felt the tension in his chest again, the kind that had no name but always showed up after boardroom sessions. By the time he returned to the estate that evening, the weight still sat on his shoulders. And across the yard, down near the far side of the conservatory, he saw her, kneeling beside a half-bloomed rosebush, sleeves rolled, apron smudged with honest work. Kate wasn't a business partner. She didn't demand quarterly proof of progress. She didn't care about his last name or market growth. She just worked, steadily, humbly, with a peace he hadn't tasted all day. And in that stillness, Christian began to crave something more than his inheritance. The Whitmore mansion never slept quietly before a fundraiser. From sunrise the air buzzed with movement, florists unloading vases, decorators lining the staircase with silk ribbons, chefs shouting orders through the back hall. Every clock in the house seemed to tick faster than usual. Even the staff walked briskly, tension stitched into every footstep. That Friday was no different. Harold Whitmore's foundation was hosting a high-profile charity fundraiser, the kind of event that attracted politicians, film producers and executives who treated generosity like a badge of status. The evening's cause, youth empowerment through education, was noble, but the conversations would be about profits, partnerships, and presents. Mrs. Hargrove handed out assignment lists in the staff quarters that morning. Kate received hers last. "You'll be stationed in the ballroom for the evening," Mrs. Hargrove said, flipping through the clipboard. "Light service only. Refill glasses, clear empty plates, and stay visible in case guests need assistance." Kate nodded politely. "Yes, ma'am." It was a simple instruction, but her stomach tightened slightly. The ballroom was where all eyes gathered. It wasn't her usual quiet corner near the West Wing or conservatory. But she didn't question it. Service was service, and she would do it well. By late afternoon the house gleamed, candlelight flickered against gold-rimmed glasses, and a pianist rehearsed soft jazz under the grand chandelier. Kate stood beside a serving table, arranging trays of hors d'oeuvres with precision. Upstairs Christian adjusted his cufflinks in the mirror. His reflection looked flawless, custom tuxedo, calm expression, but his mind wasn't at ease. He hated these events. The people who filled them were polished but hollow. He knew what they whispered. How many deals were born between glasses of champagne? When the first cars began rolling up the driveway, Kate steadied herself. Guests arrived in waves, men in sleek tuxedos, women in glittering gowns that shimmered under the chandelier. The hum of small talk filled the room, blending laughter with the clinking of glass. Kate moved through the crowd quietly, refilling drinks, collecting plates, and offering small nods to those who noticed her. Then came Vanessa. She entered on Christian's arm, radiant and poised. Every camera flash seemed to favor her. Her silver gown trailed behind her like moonlight on marble. Christian walked beside her with his usual composure, but his eyes carried a subtle distance she could feel even without looking at him directly. Vanessa noticed it too. Her gaze swept the room, and stopped on Kate. Kate was kneeling slightly, adjusting a fallen napkin near the buffet. She stood, tray balanced effortlessly on her palm. Their eyes met for only a second, but it was long enough. Vanessa's smile thinned. Later in the evening, as guests mingled, she approached the refreshment table. Kate, unaware, stepped forward with practiced grace. "Would you like a refill, ma'am?" Vanessa turned toward her, voice smooth but edged. "Oh, you're the new help everyone keeps talking about." Kate blinked. Yes, I started a few weeks ago, and now you're in the ballroom." Vanessa's eyes skimmed her from head to toe. "Impressive. Most staff don't move up that quickly." Kate kept her tone steady. "I just go where I'm assigned." Vanessa leaned slightly closer, lowering her voice. "Be careful with that. Sometimes when people climb too fast, others start to wonder who's helping them up." Kate felt her breath catch. The insinuation was sharp but disguised beneath civility. She didn't react. She simply lowered her gaze and replied softly, "I'm grateful for my job, ma'am. Nothing more, nothing less." Vanessa smiled, tight, calculated, and walked away. Christian, who had been speaking to a guest nearby, caught fragments of the exchange. He didn't intervene, not then. But his jaw tensed. He watched Kate steady herself, set the tray down, and continue her duties as though nothing had been said. She didn't retreat. She didn't sulk. She simply returned to work, moving with quiet grace through the crowd. Hours later, when the event began to wind down, Christian found her near the kitchen corridor collecting empty glasses. "You handled that well," he said quietly. Kate turned, startled. "Sir?" "Vanessa," he said simply. "I saw." Kate's lips pressed together briefly. "It wasn't my place to respond." Christian looked at her, studying her composure. That's exactly what made it powerful. For a moment they stood there, silence filling the gap between words neither dared to speak. He admired her restraint, the strength that didn't need to raise its voice. Then he stepped back slightly, his voice lowering. "Don't ever let this house make you feel small. You hold your own here, remember that." Kate nodded faintly, unsure what to say. The faintest smile tugged at her lips. "Thank you, sir, but I'm fine." "I know," Christian said softly. "That's what makes you different." She turned back to her task, cheeks warming under the soft light. And in that quiet hallway, beneath the noise of laughter and fading music, Christian realized he wasn't just defending her. He was drawn to her, not by circumstance, but by respect. The next morning the mansion was quiet again. Decorations from the fundraiser were already being taken down. The clinking of glassware and soft hum of vacuums echoed faintly through the corridors. Christian stood by the breakfast nook near the east wing, staring out at the side garden. The same one Kate had nurtured back to life. In his hand, a mug of black coffee remained untouched. He wasn't thinking about the event's success or the donors who had pledged checks. His mind kept returning to the expression on Kate's face after Vanessa's subtle jab the night before. She didn't flinch, she didn't run. She simply responded with calm dignity, and returned to her duties, like she didn't carry the weight of someone's judgment. That strength, silent as it was, stayed with him. Later that day, Kate was assigned to clean the smaller sitting room, a rarely used space near the main staircase. Christian found himself walking past and paused as he saw her kneeling to realign a rug, her movements precise. "You work like you're being watched," he said quietly, stepping inside. Kate looked up. "That's because I usually am." Christian tilted his head. "And yet you never seem to perform for it." She stood, brushing off her hands. "Respect isn't something I expect. I just don't let anyone take mine." He studied her face for a long moment. She wasn't being proud, she was just honest. Grounded, confident in her skin without needing applause. "Last night," Christian said, "when Vanessa made that comment, you could have snapped back." Kate gave a small shrug. "That's not who I am. I wasn't raised to match insult with insult." Silence speaks louder sometimes. There was no bitterness in her voice, no sarcasm, just maturity. Christian exhaled slowly. "Most people in this house wear masks. Even me." Kate's gaze softened. "You wear yours well, but I've seen you without it." That line, so simple, touched him more than he let on. He changed the subject but not the moment. "You always speak that honestly? Only when someone's listening." The room felt smaller suddenly, the air quieter. Kate picked up her tray and nodded respectfully, walking past him to return to her duties. Christian didn't stop her, but his eyes lingered after she was gone. That afternoon, Vanessa stopped by the estate unexpectedly. She had left a shawl in the upstairs guest room and insisted on picking it up personally. She made her way inside, dressed impeccably again, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. Kate happened to be dusting the entry table as she arrived. "You again," Vanessa said smoothly. Kate nodded, continuing her work. "Good afternoon, ma'am." Vanessa approached slowly, arms folded. "Tell me something. Is this your way of climbing? Being visible, earning the sun's attention, getting close through soft smiles and late afternoon gardening?" Kate straightened, meeting her gaze. "I do my job, with integrity. Whatever else people assume, is on them," Vanessa scoffed. "So that's your story?" Kate's voice remained steady. "No, that's my truth." Vanessa's lips curled. "Well, enjoy your little moment, but understand this, people like you aren't meant to stay long in places like this." Kate's eyes didn't flinch. "Maybe not. But while I'm here, I won't lower myself to anyone's expectations." At that exact moment, Christian entered through the side hallway, catching only the last few words. Vanessa turned sharply, startled. "Christian, I didn't realize you were stopping by," he said evenly. I just came to pick up something, she replied quickly, her tone shifting. We were just talking. Christian's eyes moved from Vanessa to Kate. Were you? Kate looked away. She didn't need to explain. She never did. I'll be in the West Wing, she said, quietly excusing herself. As she left, Christian turned back to Vanessa. Whatever you think you're doing, stop. Vanessa blinked. Excuse me? You don't get to insult people because you feel threatened. Threatened? She laughed dryly. By a maid? Christian didn't laugh. By a woman who's everything you pretend to be. For the first time, Vanessa didn't have a quick reply. She left with her pride intact, but her position shaken. Later that evening, Kate returned to the rose garden before sunset. She thought she was alone, but Christian approached quietly, hands in his pockets. You handled that with more grace than I ever could, he said softly. Kate looked up from the garden bed. There's no victory in stooping. He stepped closer. You shouldn't have to carry that. I've carried worse, she replied. But this is light compared to the battles I've already fought. Christian knelt beside her, not to help, just to be near. He didn't offer empty words or dramatic gestures. He just sat quietly beside her as she loosened the soil around a new root. You make silence feel powerful, he murmured. That's because it is, she said. Noise fades. But how you stand when no one's clapping, that stays. Christian looked at her, not as staff, not as a passing curiosity, but as someone he deeply respected. The admiration wasn't rushed. It was real, layered, earned, and it was only just beginning. The days that followed unfolded like the quiet turning of pages. Kate continued her work without fanfare. She rose early, fulfilled her duties, and tended the rose garden during her breaks. She still smiled at Mrs. Hargrove's instructions, offered to help the kitchen staff when she finished early, and even stayed behind once, to help one of the younger maids organize silver trays after a clumsy spill. But what changed, what subtly deepened, was Christian. He found himself gravitating toward the parts of the house he used to overlook, the conservatory, the east garden path, the back hallway where the scent of lemon polish drifted after Kate's morning routine. He didn't seek conversation every time he saw her. Sometimes he simply watched, admiring how she moved with intention, how she offered small kindnesses without expecting acknowledgement. Her presence was steady, grounding, a stark contrast to the polished surface world he had grown up in. One afternoon he saw her near the fountain, adjusting a potted plant that had toppled during the breeze. She wasn't aware he was nearby. She stood up slowly, dusting her hands, and looked toward the sky for a moment, still, reflective, content in silence. Christian took a step forward, clearing his throat softly. You're always fixing things no one notices. Kate turned. Some things still deserve to be seen even if no one's watching, he smiled. You always talk like you've lived 2 lifetimes. She shrugged lightly. Maybe I've just paid more attention in mine. Their conversations grew more frequent, never rehearsed, never overly intimate, but rich in something deeper, trust. He began sharing more about his life, but not the version the world knew. He spoke of the pressure behind his name, the weariness of always performing, the numbness that came with applause that meant nothing. Kate didn't offer pity. She listened. Do you ever wish, he asked one afternoon, as they stood near the garden wall, that life were simpler? Not simpler, she replied. Just more honest. He nodded slowly. That's what you are, honest. The way he looked at her had changed, no longer like an employer assessing a worker, or a curious man eyeing someone different. It was deeper than that. Respect had taken root, and alongside it, something tender, unspoken but growing. One evening, as the sun melted behind the hills, Kate was helping close up the east side of the estate. Most of the staff had clocked out. She moved through the conservatory, turning off lights, when she heard footsteps behind her. It was Christian, holding 2 cups. Chamomile, he said. I remembered you said that's your favorite. Kate hesitated. You didn't have to. I know. He handed her the cup. She accepted it, fingers brushing his lightly. They sat near the glass wall, steam curling from the cups as dusk settled around them. I should be heading out, she said after a few minutes. I won't keep you long. She glanced at him. Why do you talk to me like this? Christian tilted his head. Like what? Like you're not supposed to? He set his cup down. Because I don't believe in rules that silence good things. Kate didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. There's a cost to crossing lines, she said quietly, and sometimes a cost to never crossing them. That night, they didn't touch, didn't confess. But something shifted, not loudly, not publicly, quietly in the space where hearts learn to listen. The next morning Kate woke with a different feeling. She didn't name it, didn't try to predict where it would lead, but she carried it with her like a folded note in her pocket, something tender and waiting. At work, Christian passed her in the hallway. Their exchange was brief, a glance, a soft smile, nothing spoken, everything understood. And just like that, something real had begun. Not with declarations, not with drama, but with time, respect, shared silences, the kind of beginning that doesn't need an audience to be real. The conservatory was always quiet this time of day. Late afternoon sun spilled through the glass ceiling, casting long strips of light across the tiled floor, and warming the air with a soft glow. The space had once been built for the Whitmore matriarch's love of orchids, but over time it became more of a quiet escape than a floral sanctuary. And now, it belonged, if only in spirit, to Christian and Kate. Kate had been sent to tidy the space after a recent guest brunch. The large table had already been cleared, but fingerprints remained on the glass and the scent of fruit platters lingered in the corners. She worked methodically, a cloth in one hand, soft music from the old record player spinning in the background. Someone had left it on. She didn't turn it off. A low jazz instrumental, dusty, smooth, thoughtful, filled the air. Christian entered without making a sound. He paused at the doorway, watching her. Kate didn't see him at first. She was dusting a shelf lined with old books most untouched for years. Her hand lingered on one, a collection of poetry tucked between two historical volumes. She pulled it out, flipped to a random page, and smiled faintly at something on the paper. Kate turned, startled, but only for a moment. I don't always understand it, but I like how it feels. He stepped further in, glancing at the book in her hand. That one used to belong to my grandmother. She read aloud to my father in this room. I only remember that because he used to say it was the only time he ever heard her laugh. Kate nodded, carefully returning the book to its place. It still smells like old paper and lavender. Christian smiled. She used to spray her handkerchiefs with lavender oil. Everything she touched carried it. He picked up a small remote and lowered the volume on the music. The silence between them wasn't empty, it was calm. You don't seem like someone who grew up in noise, Kate said. That's because the noise was dressed in manners, Christian replied. Kate looked at him. That's a clever way of saying quiet wasn't peaceful. He chuckled, impressed by how easily she caught his meaning. You always talk like this? He asked. Only when someone's really listening, she answered. They both smiled. He walked to the bookshelf beside her, running his fingers along the spines. No one comes in here anymore. That's what makes it feel honest, she said. Empty rooms can't pretend. Christian turned toward her, leaning slightly against the shelf. You know, you make this place feel less like a museum. Kate raised an eyebrow. You say that like it's a compliment. It is, he said. Everything here has always looked expensive, but nothing ever felt alive. Her laugh was low and real. So I'm the noise in your museum? You're the melody, he corrected. She blinked, surprised by the intimacy of the word, but said nothing. Christian walked to the old record player and adjusted the needle, letting the music return, low and warm. Then, without thinking too hard, he sat on the floor, back resting against the wall. You don't have to go, he said, glancing at her. Just sit. Kate hesitated. For a second she looked toward the door, but no one called for her, no timer beeped, no footsteps rushed, so she placed her cloth on the table, brushed off her apron, and lowered herself onto the floor opposite him. They sat in stillness, a modest table between them, the sound of jazz looping gently in the background. Outside the sky faded into a deeper gold. You ever think you'd be here? Christian asked, voice barely above a whisper. In a mansion? Kate replied, half smiling. No, not like this. How'd you imagine your life? Kate looked down at her hands. I didn't have the luxury to imagine, I just kept moving forward. Why? Because standing still felt like giving up. Christian nodded slowly, eyes never leaving her. You make strength look easy. She looked at him, calm but serious. It's not. But I've never had the choice to be weak. Their gazes locked. The distance between them wasn't just physical anymore. It was thinning, quietly, with every moment spent in that sun-warmed room. But neither moved. Neither crossed any lines, because the truth unfolding between them didn't need to be rushed. It was already real. The soft jazz continued to play in the background, crackling gently from the vintage record player in the conservatory. Kate sat with her back resting against the leg of the reading bench, her apron folded neatly beside her. Christian remained across from her on the floor, legs stretched, sleeves rolled halfway up. Their silence was comfortable, filled with quiet glances and the subtle language of two people easing into trust. "You said you kept moving forward," Christian said gently. "But where were you going?" Kate paused, eyes following a swirl of light filtering through the window. "To freedom," she said. "I didn't always know what it looked like, but I knew it couldn't look like struggle every day." Christian shifted slightly. "You've been through more than you let on. Most people from where I'm from have," she said, "but we don't wear it like badges, we just live." He waited a beat before asking, "What did you want to be? When you were little, I mean." A small smile tugged at her lips. "A writer." Christian blinked. "Really?" She nodded. "I used to write in journals, stories, poems, prayers. I'd make up lives for people on the bus or couples at the corner store. I was always trying to find the why behind people's faces." "That sounds like someone who notices more than she says." "I do," she replied. "Words are heavy. If I'm going to use them, I want them to land in the right place." Christian leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees. "Why didn't you pursue it?" Kate sighed. "Life got loud. Bills came fast. My mom worked 2 shifts. My brother was still in school. College had to wait. But you didn't give up." "No," she said. "Just paused." She looked at him then, her gaze calm but strong. "People like me don't get the luxury of dreams without planning every step. It's not that we don't dream. It's that dreaming can't be our only plan." Christian nodded, his expression thoughtful. "What if you could go back, pick up where you left off?" Kate shrugged lightly. "I still write sometimes, after work, before bed. Just notes, pieces." "Do you still want to write? Books?" She hesitated. "Yes, but not about fairy tales or glass slippers." Christian smiled. "What would they be about? Real things. Women like my mother, boys like my brother, girls who clean other people's floors but still go home and help their siblings with homework. About love, not the kind with flowers and dinners, but the kind that shows up when you're sick or tired or broke. The kind that doesn't need an audience." Christian was quiet for a moment. "That's the kind of story I'd want to read," he said. Kate chuckled, folding her arms loosely. "That's just life." "No," he said. "That's life told right." They fell into silence again, but this time it felt different, closer. Christian looked at her, seeing not the maid who entered through the service gate each morning, but the woman with strength that didn't brag and wisdom that didn't shout. The woman who had stories, inside her, waiting to bloom. The woman who could turn broken things into beautiful ones and still walk with grace. "I think you should write," he said, voice low. "And I think you should listen to more jazz," she countered, teasing gently. They both laughed, and the sound filled the conservatory like sunlight. "When I was little," Kate continued, "I thought the only way to get out of where I was to be someone else. Someone richer, lighter, quieter. But as I got older, I realized I didn't need to change who I was. I just needed space to grow." Christian's gaze held hers. "You don't need a new version of yourself to fit in here, Kate. You're already more real than most of the people in this house. Real doesn't always get accepted, but it's what we remember." Her eyes softened. "I want to leave something behind, not just for myself but for the people I came from. For girls like me, I want to tell stories that matter." Christian leaned his head back against the wall, staring at the glass ceiling. "You already are. I just clean," she said. "No," he said firmly. "You show up. You carry dignity. You remind this house what kindness feels like." A hush settled between them, but it wasn't empty. Christian glanced at the clock. Nearly an hour had passed since they sat down, but neither of them made a move to leave. The light had shifted from afternoon gold to the soft gray of early evening. "What about you?" Kate asked suddenly. "What did you want to be when you were little?" Christian smirked. "I think I wanted to be a pilot at one point. Why? Freedom, I guess, the idea of seeing everything, going anywhere. But then I learned the family business would decide that for me." "And you let it?" He hesitated. "I didn't know I had a choice. Until recently." Kate didn't press, she just looked at him with the kind of listening that invited truth. Talking to you, Christian said after a pause, feels like exhaling. That's what it's supposed to feel like, she replied. He looked at her again, longer this time. You're not just someone who works here. I know, she said simply, but thank you for seeing it. The moment hung in the air, close, quiet, fragile. Neither of them moved toward the door. Neither of them needed to, because some connections don't demand a name, they just grow, softly, and slowly begin to mean everything. The following evening, Christian attended a dinner hosted by one of his father's oldest business allies, a semi-formal event held at a luxury rooftop venue downtown. Vanessa accompanied him, dressed in sleek emerald silk, her makeup flawless, her charm effortless. She greeted each guest by name, slipped into conversations with ease, and played the role of the perfect partner. And yet, Christian couldn't shake the hollowness beneath it all. As the evening wore on, he watched Vanessa smile without softness, laugh without warmth. Her hand rested on his arm, but her energy was elsewhere. Measured, performative, calculated. It wasn't new. He had known this version of her for a long time. But now, he had something to compare it to. His mind drifted back to the conservatory, the scent of the wood polish, the music, Kate's voice when she spoke about her dreams. There had been no performance, no desire to impress. Just truth, just presence, just the kind of sincerity that filled the silence with comfort instead of tension. Midway through the dinner, Christian excused himself and stepped out onto the balcony for air. Vanessa followed after a minute, her heels clicking softly behind him. You've been quiet tonight? Christian didn't look at her. Just tired. From what? She asked lightly. You've barely said 5 sentences. He gave a dry laugh. Maybe that's why I'm tired. Vanessa tilted her head, confused. I thought you liked these kinds of events. You always did well at them. I know how to perform, he said. That doesn't mean I enjoy it. She stepped closer, voice sweetening. Well, you've always been good at being composed. It's one of the things I like most about you. Christian turned slowly, eyes searching hers. Do you even know what I like? Vanessa blinked. Excuse me? Do you know what I care about? What keeps me up? What makes me breathe deeper instead of holding it in? She straightened, defensive. Where is this coming from? I'm just wondering, he said, if the roles were reversed, if I lost everything, if the title vanished, would you still be standing next to me? Vanessa's voice cooled. This feels like an attack. Christian shook his head. It's not. I've started seeing the difference between proximity and connection. Are you trying to say we're not connected? I'm saying I don't know if we ever were. Silence fell between them. You're not making sense, Vanessa said flatly. I think I'm finally starting to. He left her on the balcony and returned inside, but the weight of the conversation followed him all the way home. The next morning, Christian sat across from his father in the study, reviewing contract updates. But he couldn't focus. Harold noticed. You're distracted. Christian didn't respond. Harold folded his glasses and leaned forward. If this is about the estate succession plan. It's not, Christian said. Vanessa? Christian gave a single nod. She's not who I thought she was. Harold raised an eyebrow. She's exactly who I thought she was. Poised. Intelligent. Comes from a good family. And cold. Harold frowned. We don't marry for warmth. We marry for alignment, compatibility, vision. You don't build a life with a resume, Christian replied. You build it with a heartbeat. Harold leaned back in his chair, unimpressed. Careful, you're starting to sound sentimental. Christian stood. Maybe sentiment is the only thing I've been missing. He walked out without waiting for a reply. That afternoon, he spotted Kate in the distance again. She was on the back patio, helping Mrs. Hargrove rearrange furniture for an upcoming weekend event. Her sleeves were rolled, her hair pulled back, her steps purposeful. Her presence was full, even in stillness. Christian approached and nodded politely to Mrs. Hargrove before stepping aside to speak with Kate. Do you have a minute? He asked. She looked up, surprised but not startled. Yes. He led her to the edge of the garden where the sun had begun to tilt west. They walked in silence for a few seconds. I've been thinking, he said, about how often people confuse status with connection. Kate looked at him. You're not confused. Not anymore, he said. But I was, for a long time. They paused beneath a tall cypress tree, its shade casting a cool relief. When I'm with Vanessa, he continued, I feel like I'm standing beside a mirror, Just reflecting whatever version of myself she finds useful." Kate nodded slowly. "That's not connection. That's choreography." He exhaled, a soft laugh escaping his chest. "That's exactly it." "So what are you going to do?" she asked. Christian's face turned serious. "Be honest." Kate looked down at the grass. "That has a cost, so does pretending." He studied her profile. How calm she remained even when speaking truth. No panic, no pretense. Just stillness forged through experience. "You make me see things clearly," he said. "I don't do anything," she replied. "You do everything," he said. Their eyes met. There was no romantic declaration, no dramatic gesture, but in that still moment Christian felt the contrast between the warmth in front of him and the coldness he'd grown accustomed to. And he knew which one his soul had been waiting for. Vanessa could feel it before anyone confirmed it. It was the small things at first. Christian's tone during their calls, the way he stopped making future plans, the distance in his eyes even when he sat beside her. She knew Christian well enough to recognize when his mind had shifted. But it wasn't just that, it was that girl, the maid, Kate. Vanessa noticed how Christian no longer arrived at dinners with the same attentive ease. He didn't reach for her hand without thinking. He didn't ask about her week, or offer her quiet reassurances in crowded rooms. He had become careful, too careful. It meant his heart was elsewhere. One afternoon Vanessa arrived at the estate unannounced. She told the guard she had an item to retrieve, but really she wanted to see things for herself. To catch something out of place. She walked through the main hall with ease, greeted familiar faces, and waited for a moment when Christian wasn't around. Then, slowly, she began observing the house in silence, looking for the small signs that betrayed closeness between people who claimed none. She didn't have to look far. Near the conservatory she saw Kate kneeling beside a tray of potted herbs, gently transferring soil into new containers. Her face was calm, movements tender. It might have been an ordinary scene, except for the fresh flowers on the side table nearby, a modest bouquet of yellow tulips in a glass vase, set beside a steaming cup of chamomile. Vanessa narrowed her eyes. Kate wasn't alone. Christian walked in from the side hallway, sleeves rolled, tie loose around his neck. He paused at the sight of Kate working and leaned slightly against the doorway. "You started without me?" he said playfully. Kate smiled faintly. "The roots won't wait for anyone." Vanessa didn't walk in. She stepped back silently, and pressed her phone to her ear, pretending to take a call as she exited the room unnoticed. But her jaw was clenched, her thoughts racing. That smile, that tone, that moment, it was enough. That evening Vanessa requested a private meeting with Harold Whitmore. She arrived at the downtown office dressed in navy blue, her heels sharp, her expression perfectly composed. "I think you should know what's happening in your house," she said. Harold raised an eyebrow. "What exactly are you referring to?" "Christian is developing an inappropriate connection with one of the staff." Harold's gaze sharpened. "Who?" "Her name is Kate, the maid who tends the garden. I've seen it with my own eyes." Harold leaned back, folding his hands. "Christian is free to speak to anyone in his own home." Vanessa's tone cooled. "I don't think it's just speaking." He didn't respond immediately. "If you're concerned," he said at last, "perhaps it's a reflection of your own relationship with him." Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "You're seriously going to dismiss this?" "No," he said flatly, "but I'm also not going to make assumptions based on jealousy." Vanessa's voice sharpened. "I've stood beside Christian for 3 years. I've shown up at every event, every dinner. I've represented this family with class." Harold didn't blink. "And yet you're losing him to someone who doesn't care about status." Vanessa's face faltered. "Just for a second. I'm trying to protect your legacy," she said. "No," Harold corrected. "You're trying to protect your place in it." She stood, quietly gathering her purse. "You're making a mistake," she said before walking out. "So are you," Harold muttered under his breath after she was gone. At the estate, the air grew tight over the next few days. Vanessa returned often, lingering longer than necessary. She inserted herself into conversations with staff, asking questions she had no business asking, smiling too wide, standing too close. Kate noticed, so did Christian. One afternoon, while Kate was organizing the pantry, Vanessa stepped in. "You're very comfortable here," she said. Kate didn't stop stacking. "I do my job." You're quite familiar with Christian these days. Kate turned. He speaks to me respectfully. That's all. Vanessa stepped closer. Let me give you some advice. Stay in your place. These kinds of friendly interactions don't last, not in families like this. Kate didn't move. I didn't ask for advice. Vanessa's smile vanished. You think you've earned something here, don't you? Kate looked her in the eyes. I've earned peace. That's enough for me. Peace? Vanessa sneered. Let's see how long that lasts. Kate didn't flinch. Have a good afternoon, ma'am. Vanessa left in a rush of perfume and tension. Christian found Kate later that day in the rose garden. Did she say something to you? He asked gently. Kate didn't turn. You already know the answer. He stepped closer. She doesn't define what happens next. Kate finally faced him. No, but neither do you, unless you choose to stop pretending. He nodded slowly. I'm done pretending. Good, Kate said softly, because so am I. There are moments when the truth doesn't knock, it kicks the door open. Christian had been receiving anonymous messages for over a week. At first, he ignored them, blocked the number, deleted the texts. But when a third message came, this time with a photo attached, he stopped pretending it was nothing. The photo was taken at a rooftop bar in West Hollywood. Vanessa, another man, too close to be casual. Her hand was resting on the man's knee. His face was turned away, but her smile was unmistakable. Soft, flirty, real in a way Christian hadn't seen from her in months. He stared at the image, heart pounding with betrayal and clarity. Not anger, yet, but a stunned kind of realization. The message that came with it was short. Ask her about Tuesday nights. Vino Lounge, private booth. Christian didn't respond. He didn't forward it. He simply closed his phone, leaned back in his chair, and stared at the ceiling. Everything made sense now. The way Vanessa had become more controlling. Her sharp questions about Kate, her sudden visits, her rehearsed warmth. This wasn't about suspicion anymore. This was confirmation. That evening when Vanessa arrived for dinner as planned, Christian didn't greet her at the door. He let the butler show her in. She walked into the lounge wearing a sleek, off-shoulder dress, carrying the same confidence she always did. Hey, she said, walking toward him. You're not even going to say hello? Christian remained seated. Where were you last Tuesday? Vanessa paused. Excuse me? Tuesday, Vino Lounge. Corner booth. Who were you with? Vanessa's lips parted slightly. Her mask flickered. Why are you asking me that? Because I know you weren't there for business. She tried to regroup. I had a meeting with someone whose hand you were holding. Silence. She crossed her arms. You've been distant for weeks. What do you expect? Christian stood. Not loyalty apparently. Don't turn this on me, she snapped. You've been entertaining some girl from the staff. I've seen it, Christian. You've seen respect, he said flatly. Maybe that's foreign to you. Her face went rigid. You have no idea what it's like to stand beside someone who's drifting every day. I've been patient. I've done everything your family expects. Exactly, Christian cut in. You did what was expected, never what was honest. She stared at him, words caught between rage and defeat. This doesn't have to end like this, she whispered. Christian's voice was calm, it already did, and with that, he walked past her, leaving her standing alone in the house she never truly belonged to. The silence after Vanessa left echoed louder than the confrontation itself. Christian sat in the study, alone, long after the door had closed behind her. The estate was quiet, staff had retired for the night, the lights had dimmed. And yet his thoughts screamed louder than any words ever could. He had spent years building a life that looked perfect on the outside, attending events with Vanessa, shaking hands at fundraisers, smiling in holiday photos that would be printed in society magazines. It was all curated, well-stitched, presentable, hollow. But now the seams had split. He pulled the engagement ring box from the drawer, the same box he had chosen with his mother's approval, the one Vanessa had shown off at parties for the past year. He opened it and stared. The diamond glittered in the dim light. Clean, clear, cold. He closed it. The next morning Christian skipped breakfast and drove to the downtown Whitmore building alone. He was expected at a quarterly leadership strategy meeting. He walked in early, shook hands, smiled where appropriate, but he felt like a ghost wearing someone else's skin. After the meeting, his father called him into the private office. I heard you and Vanessa had a disagreement, Harold said, sipping espresso behind his desk. Christian kept his voice level. We ended the engagement. Harold blinked. You what? It's over. His father leaned forward. Christian, this isn't just about you and her, this is about the company, the family, the image. That's the problem, Christian said. This has always been about image. Harold's tone tightened. That woman's father is a sitting board member, then maybe he should marry her. The silence that followed was sharp. Harold exhaled. You think this is about feelings? You're acting like a teenager who got his heart broken. Christian stood still. I'm acting like a man who's done pretending. Harold's jaw worked for a moment, but he didn't speak. Christian turned for the door. I'm not stepping away from the business, he said before leaving. But I'm stepping into a life I actually want. Later that day, Christian returned to the estate. Vanessa had already sent her assistant to collect her belongings. Her closet was empty. The guest room she sometimes used was cleared out. Her perfume no longer lingered in the air. Christian didn't feel relief. Not yet. He felt grief. Not for the relationship, but for the years he had spent living someone else's version of a perfect life. He stood on the balcony outside his room, looking out at the garden below. The same garden Kate had brought back to life. The same place he now associated with calm, purpose, and truth. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. It was Mrs. Hargrove. Mr. Christian, she said quietly, everything all right? He nodded. Just needed air, she hesitated. Miss Kate is finishing her shift. She mentioned the roses need fresh mulch. Christian nodded slowly. Thank you. Also, Mrs. Hargrove added carefully, if I may say, some things grow stronger when they're planted in broken soil. Christian looked at her, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. I hope you're not just talking about roses. She gave the faintest smile. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. Downstairs, Christian passed through the foyer, down the hall and toward the garden path. He wasn't looking for a solution, he was looking for stillness. And maybe, finally, for something real. The late afternoon sun bathed the rose garden in a quiet amber glow, casting long shadows that stretched across the path like silent witnesses. The estate was unusually calm for a weekday. No urgent calls, no clinking champagne flutes, no curated laughter from social guests. Kate stood by the far edge of the garden with her sleeves rolled up and her fingers brushing the dark soil. She moved with purpose, carefully, pruning stems, tying tender vines to wooden supports, digging gently into the roots with reverence only someone with deep respect for nature could offer. She didn't hear him approach. Christian watched her for a moment, arms folded, expression unreadable. Her back was to him, posture strong yet soft. The sun caught her skin and made her glow, not with diamonds, but with something richer. Peace. When she finally sensed someone nearby, she looked up, startled, then softened when she saw him. Mr. Christian, she greeted, setting the shears down. You don't have to call me that, he said, his voice quiet. Kate blinked. That's what everyone calls you. I'm not everyone, he replied. Not anymore. She didn't smile, but her expression held something honest. I heard about the engagement, she said, careful not to sound too assuming. Christian gave a small nod, stepping closer but keeping respectful distance. I ended it. Kate met his gaze, steady and calm. I'm sorry, that can't be easy. He looked down. It wasn't hard to let go of a lie. What's hard is realizing how long you've lived one. That silence again. A truth hung in the air between them. He wasn't talking about Vanessa anymore. He was talking about himself, about who he had been, and who he no longer wanted to be. Kate knelt beside a cluster of thorny bushes. She touched a bloom gently as if listening. These roses were almost dead, she said softly. Too much sun, not enough care. The roots were strangling each other. But I didn't rip them out, I gave them space. Christian crouched beside her, slowly, and they came back, she nodded, wiping a bead of sweat from her temple. Plants need room to breathe. People too. He studied her face. There was something grounding about her presence, like still water in a world that never stopped rushing. I don't know how to do this, he said. How to start again? Kate paused, her hands still in the soil. Then start with stillness. He watched her carefully. No one tells you how loud silence can be, he said, voice strained. It's only loud, she replied, if you've never listened to yourself before. Christian exhaled sharply, eyes stinging. She reached for a bottle of water beside her and offered it. You thirsty? He chuckled lightly, took it. Yeah. I guess I am, not just for water but for truth, for simplicity, for someone who wasn't performing, competing, or trying to fit into a box. "I was never enough for Vanessa," he said after a long pause. "Not emotionally, not spiritually, not anything real." We looked right on paper, but the pages were blank. Kate looked at him. "So what are you writing now?" He stared at her. She wasn't pushing, she wasn't fishing, she was asking the kind of question that forced him to look inward instead of outward. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I think it starts with not pretending anymore." She gave a slow, approving nod. "That's a good place to begin." They sat quietly, watching the wind tease the petals. No words filled the space, and none needed to. When Christian finally stood, he offered his hand. Kate took it, but unlike before, when hands brushed by accident in passing, this time they held. Not in romance, not yet, but in honesty. And for now, that was enough. Later that evening, as dusk wrapped the estate in velvet blue, Kate stood by the kitchen's side entrance, hands wrapped around a chipped mug of warm tea. The air was cooler now, thick with the scent of jasmine and earth. She wasn't thinking of Christian, not entirely, but her spirit carried the weight of his sorrow, like a quiet prayer tucked into her pocket. The door creaked open behind her. She didn't have to turn. "You all right?" she asked gently. Christian's voice came low, almost a whisper. "No, but I knew I'd find you here." Kate shifted slightly, making space. He stepped out onto the porch, leaned against the wooden railing. There was no suit jacket now, just a soft gray sweater and slumped shoulders. She offered him her mug. "It's peppermint, good for a heavy heart." He accepted it with a grateful glance, took a sip, then stared out at the night. "Everything feels fake," he said. "The house, the people, the money. I spent years trying to be what my father needed, what Vanessa expected, and now that it's all gone, I don't even know who I am without it." Kate listened. "Everyone keeps telling me how lucky I am," he continued. "To be born into this, to have choices, but no one ever asked if those choices were even mine." He paused. "You're probably thinking I sound entitled." She turned to face him. "No, I think you sound human." Christian looked at her, eyes tired. Kate continued. "People assume that struggle only belongs to the poor, but pain has many faces. Yours just wears a tuxedo." That drew a half-smile from him. "You always talk like that." She shrugged. "My grandma used to say, 'Don't dress your words in gold, just let them be clean.'" A beat passed. "I used to pray for a way out," she said quietly. "Back in South LA when my mama was crying over bills, and my brothers were running the streets. I didn't pray for riches, I prayed for clarity, for peace." Christian studied her. "And did you find it?" She met his gaze. "Not all at once, but little by little. I found myself in the quiet, in faith, in choosing not to carry what didn't belong to me." The wind stirred again. He looked down at the mug in his hand. "I'm angry," he admitted. "At her, at myself, at all of it." Kate didn't flinch. "You're allowed to be. But don't stay there. Bitterness is a heavy chain." He was quiet. "Then how do you forgive someone who never asked for it?" She exhaled softly. "Forgiveness isn't always about them. Sometimes it's how you free yourself." Christian looked out into the dark, eyes glinting with reflection. "I keep thinking about the garden," he said. "What you said. About giving the roots space to breathe." Kate nodded. "I think I need to do that. For myself." "You will," she said. "But not by rushing it. Healing takes time, and faith." He turned to her again. "Do you think some things are just meant to break so we can build something better?" Kate's eyes held his. "Sometimes, but not everything broken needs throwing away. Some things just need grace." He stared at her a long moment, then whispered, "Like me?" Kate reached out and gently took the mug from his hand. Her fingers grazed his, deliberate but calm. "Like all of us." The porch light flickered slightly. He stepped closer, not to claim but to feel the warmth of something unspoken, the kind of closeness that didn't ask for permission but honored presence. For the first time, Christian didn't feel the pressure to perform, impress, or prove. Here, with her, under a plain bulb and a quiet sky, he was simply a man trying to remember how to feel. Kate looked up at him, her voice soft. "It's okay to be broken, but don't forget, you're still here. That means something." A hush followed, one where nothing needed to be said. The house behind them still carried noise and names and expectations. But out here, it was just truth, just two people, and the echo of something deeper beginning. Maybe not love, not yet, but the kind of understanding that births it. It wasn't long after Vanessa's public departure that the walls of the mansion grew quieter, but the silence was heavy, not peaceful. Christian stood at the tall window in his father's study, arms crossed. Outside, the rose garden looked restful under the late morning sun. But inside the room, the tension was razor sharp. The door opened with a firm push. Elliot Barrett, Christian's father, stepped in. Impeccably dressed, face weathered by years of calculated decisions and control. He shut the door behind him, slow and intentional. Christian turned but didn't speak first. "Sit," Elliot said. "I'm fine standing." "Christian, I said I'm fine." His father sighed and walked over to the liquor cabinet, pouring himself a neat glass of scotch. "You've embarrassed the family. Walked out on a good match. Stirred up whispers." Christian stayed still. "She was cheating on me." Elliot waved the glass. "Do you think people care about that? What matters is the image. The alliance. The business." Christian's voice tightened. "So I was just a pawn in your next merger?" Elliot took a sip. "You are my son. Everything I've built, every door open to you, was for a reason, and now you're throwing it all away. For what?" The room fell into silence. "You've always told me to be a man," Christian said quietly. "Well, a real man doesn't play house with someone who lies to him." "You're not a man yet," Elliot said sharply. "A man understands sacrifice, strategy, legacy." Christian's jaw clenched. "Legacy doesn't mean much when you're alone in a room full of people pretending they love you." Elliot walked closer, voice low. "Whatever fling you're having with the help, it ends now." Christian's hands dropped to his sides. "Kate has more integrity than most people who walk through this house." "She's the maid," Elliot said coldly. "She's a woman with honor," Christian shot back, "and she never once asked me for anything. You're letting your emotions make you weak." "No," Christian said, holding his father's gaze. "They're making me honest." Elliot took a breath, composed himself. "If you don't end it, I will, and you know exactly how." Christian blinked. "You'd threaten her livelihood to control me?" "I'd do what I must to protect this family name," Elliot replied. "You carry it, whether you like it or not." The door closed with finality behind him. Christian didn't move, his fists clenched by his sides. His world, once built by expectations and polished presentations, was crumbling brick by brick. But somehow, he wasn't afraid anymore. The only shame he felt was ever believing that a last name made someone noble. Out the window he saw her again, Kate, kneeling in the dirt by the rose bed. Hair tied back, sleeves rolled up, rooted, honest, real. He exhaled. They could threaten titles, legacies, reputations, but they couldn't erase truth. And Christian knew now, truth was worth fighting for. The sun was still rising when Kate arrived at the mansion the next morning. Her heart was steady, but her mind wrestled with everything unsaid. Since the fundraiser and the long talk in the garden, Christian had pulled back slightly, not cold, not distant, just careful. She couldn't blame him, not with all that had happened. As she entered through the back service gate, the head housekeeper, Mrs. Geraldine, stood waiting, arms crossed, lips pinched. "Morning," Kate greeted softly, brushing dust off her modest blouse. "Inside." "Now." Geraldine's tone didn't invite questions. Kate followed her into the utility hallway, the one that never saw sunlight. Once the door shut behind them, the older woman's demeanor shifted from managerial to something more personal, but not warmer. "I've been patient with you, Kate," Geraldine began, adjusting her glasses. "You work hard, you're quiet, respectful. I've got no complaints about your chores." Kate nodded cautiously. Kate blinked. "I don't understand." Geraldine took a step closer. "You're not blind. You see the way Master Christian looks at you, and that's exactly the problem." Kate felt her throat tighten. "I've never disrespected this house." "I didn't say you have, but this isn't South LA, baby girl. This is Beverly Hills, and when folks start whispering about a Barrett boy and a maid from across the tracks, no good ever comes of it." The words hit harder than they should have, because they came not from hate, but warning. "I didn't ask for his attention," Kate said, voice barely a whisper. "I believe you," Geraldine said, quieter now. "But this house wasn't built on truth, it runs on optics." Kate lowered her eyes. "Just keep your head down," Geraldine sighed. "Stay invisible. That's how we survive in places like this." Later that day, Kate worked alone in the linen quarters, folding tablecloths that cost more than her month's rent. She hadn't seen Christian all day, not in the halls, not during staff rotations, not even in the garden. Every part of her wanted to believe he was just busy. But a small part whispered something else. At lunchtime she stepped outside to get a breath of air. She sat on the stone bench near the hedge wall, half shaded, half forgotten. She didn't hear footsteps until someone cleared their throat. Vanessa. Blonde hair curled to perfection, a silk scarf tied around her neck, sunglasses perched on her head though the clouds had rolled in. She looked like money, and she knew it. "Well," Vanessa said, smirking, "aren't you just a little too comfortable?" Kate stood, instantly alert. "Excuse me? You think playing humble makes you untouchable?" Kate didn't answer. Vanessa took a step forward. "Let me explain something. People like you don't last long here. You're a charity case, a chore girl." Kate's voice was calm. "You seem very bothered for someone who's moved on." Vanessa's eyes flashed. "Don't mistake his kindness for love." Kate stood tall. "And don't mistake my silence for fear." There was a beat, a long one, where the air hung heavy between them. Then Vanessa smiled coldly. "He'll come to his senses, they always do." She walked away. But Kate didn't sit back down. She walked to the kitchen, tied her apron tighter, and got back to work. If the walls were watching, let them. She had nothing to hide. Christian stood in the sunroom, arms crossed, staring through the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the east lawn. The walls around him were quiet, but his mind was anything but. He hadn't spoken to Kate since the garden, not because he didn't want to, but because everyone else in his life suddenly had an opinion about her, especially his father. That morning's confrontation still echoed in his ears. "You are a Barrett, Christian. Do not shame this family. She's not one of us. You're the heir. Act like it. Act like it." What did that even mean anymore? Fake smiles at galas, hollow relationships, being paraded next to women like Vanessa, chosen more for family photos than for love. That was the act, and he was tired of it. Christian finally left the room and headed for the lower garden, where staff often rotated during break times. He found Kate standing near the greenhouse, talking softly to Nia, the florist's assistant. She hadn't seen him yet. For a moment he just watched, her head slightly tilted as she listened, her smile gentle and honest. She wasn't putting on a show. She never did. And that was what scared the people around him. He walked toward her. Nia noticed him first and stepped away quickly. Kate turned, surprised. "Christian," she said quietly, unsure. "Hey," he replied, voice low. She wiped her hands on her apron. "You okay?" "No," he admitted. "But I'm here." A pause. "I heard some things," he continued. "From people who think they know what's best for me." She stayed quiet. "They're wrong," he added. Kate glanced away. "They're not wrong about the world we're in." Christian stepped closer. "Then let's not be in their world." She shook her head. "It's not that simple. I don't want performance anymore, Kate. I don't want to smile at donors I don't respect or toast champagne to a future that doesn't feel real. I want truth. I want something that doesn't feel staged." Her eyes held his. "I want someone who makes me feel like I'm not just my last name," he whispered. Kate looked down. "And what happens when truth costs you everything?" "Then it's worth it." The silence between them held something deeper than words. Christian exhaled. "I know people are watching, judging, whispering." She gave a small, tired smile. "You're used to the whispers. I'm used to the warnings." He nodded. "But I'm not walking away," he said firmly. She didn't speak. "I just needed you to know that," he added. As he turned to walk away, she called out, soft but steady, "I believe you." He paused, then smiled faintly before continuing back toward the house. Later that day, Christian entered his father's office. The elder Barrett sat behind his desk, flipping through business proposals. "I'm not going through with the Princeton merger," Christian said, firm. His father looked up sharply. "Excuse me?" "I'm restructuring the board vote. Too many yes men, not enough real advisors. And who gave you the authority to override?" "I have the authority, and I'm not going to keep playing a role you've designed for me." Mr. Barrett stood. "This isn't about business. It's about her, isn't it?" Christian didn't deny it. His father's voice dropped low. "I built this legacy with discipline. You want to throw it away for a maid with kind eyes? You'll regret it." Christian stepped back. "No. I regret not choosing truth sooner." He left the room, closing the door behind him, not angrily but with resolve. Back in her small room above the garage, Kate sat by the window, unaware of the shift that had just taken place. But somewhere in her spirit, she felt it. Like the first deep breath after a storm. The mood in the mansion had shifted, though the halls still gleamed and the staff moved in polished silence. An invisible line had been drawn. Everyone felt it. A tension not born of scandal but of subtle defiance. Christian and Kate had not declared anything aloud, yet their bond had become undeniable, too quiet to be rebellious, too sincere to be denied. It wasn't about stolen kisses or secret rendezvous. It was in the way Christian's eyes found Kate across the room, in how he lingered near the gardens longer than he should. In the silence that fell when they passed each other and didn't need to speak to feel understood. The house watched them. And judged. On a Thursday afternoon, the Barrett Foundation held its quarterly luncheon in the Grand Ballroom. The event had always been a showcase for donors, politicians, and polished smiles. Vanessa arrived draped in designer silk, the embodiment of expectations. Kate was assigned to the catering team that day. Her role was simple: refill water glasses and keep to the shadows. But as fate would have it, her tray slipped near the head table. A shallow clatter, not enough to be dramatic, but enough for every gaze to turn. Vanessa, seated beside Christian's father, raised her eyebrows and muttered just loud enough, "Some people should know their place." Christian heard it, and he stood. In front of everyone. "Kate," he said, clear and calm, "it's all right." The room hushed. "I asked her to be assigned, near my table," he added. Kate froze. Vanessa's lips parted in disbelief. "Christian." "Because I trust her," he finished, looking squarely at Vanessa. "Which is more than I can say for others." A stunned silence followed. Kate gathered her tray, face composed, but inside her heart beat in stunned rhythm. Later, in the quiet of the side garden, Christian found her. She was sitting on the low bench near the azalea bushes, her apron folded neatly in her lap, her expression unreadable. "Was I wrong to speak up?" he asked. Kate looked at him slowly. "You embarrassed her." "She embarrassed herself," Kate exhaled. "This isn't just about standing up, it's about what happens next. Your family. They don't forget." "I'm not asking them to," Christian replied. "I'm asking you not to shrink, just because they're uncomfortable." Kate studied him. "You're risking a lot." He knelt in front of her, not caring about the damp grass or the dirt that might stain his suit. "I'm not risking anything worth keeping," he said. "They want me to live on stage. But I feel alive in these quiet moments with you." She blinked slowly. "Christian." He stood and offered his hand. She took it, and with that simple gesture, everything unspoken became a promise. The following days were a slow awakening. Christian began withdrawing from the facade he'd upheld for years. No more attending social mixers out of obligation. No more half-hearted business gestures meant to impress old money circles. Instead, he met with his team privately, revising internal policies, proposing scholarship funds through the Barrett Foundation. He used his influence with purpose, and every time he did, Kate saw another layer of the man beneath the name. In turn, Kate started allowing herself to be seen. During one of their walks through the back lawn, she shared childhood memories. Her mother humming over a cracked stovetop, her father teaching her how to patch a window screen in their South LA home, her Sunday mornings, spent at New Life Church under Pastor Rubin's watch. These weren't conversations full of grandeur, but to Christian, they were gold, because in Kate's voice, there was no performance, only truth. One evening, Kate arrived at the garden after hours to find a small table set up near the trimmed hedges. A modest dinner, 2 chairs, and Christian, waiting, holding a candle in his hand. "This isn't a date," he said, smiling. "It's just 2 people who needed peace today." She smiled softly. "Peace sounds good." They sat. They talked about nothing, and everything. The crooked way the moon hung that night, the creak in the mansion's second staircase, the recipe for sweet cornbread. It was the safest Christian had ever felt, not because there were no eyes watching, but because, for the first time, he didn't care. As Kate leaned back in her chair, laughing softly at one of his bad jokes, he thought, "This is what truth looks like. Not extravagant, not loud, just real." Their bond didn't need approval. It grew not through rebellion but through resilience. In a world that demanded performance, they chose presence. In a house full of hierarchy, they chose humanity. They were not yet lovers, not yet anything defined, but they were something honest, and in the quiet strength of their connection, a future waited. The sun hadn't yet crested the roofline of the Barrett estate when the storm rolled in, not from the skies but from within the walls. A misplaced bracelet, Vanessa's favorite one, diamond-studded, custom-designed, and mysteriously missing after the previous evening's event in the drawing room. And the last person seen polishing that room? Kate. It didn't take long for whispers to slither through the hallways like smoke under a door. One maid said she saw Kate near Vanessa's dressing area. Another claimed Kate was the only staff member not accounted for during the final head count. By mid-morning, the housekeeper, Mrs. Aldridge, summoned Kate with the tight-lipped formality that came before storms. They stood in the staff corridor, not the ballroom, not the garden, just beneath the staircase, beside the cleaning closets, a place meant for people meant to stay hidden. Mrs. Aldridge's tone was cool. "Miss Kate, Miss Vanessa has reported her bracelet missing. You were seen in the vicinity." Kate blinked. "Yes, ma'am. I cleaned the drawing room. I didn't go near her personal things. She says otherwise. I didn't take anything." A pause. Then the head butler, Mr. Grant, stepped forward holding a thin silver tray. Resting upon it, a velvet pouch. "Found behind the flower arrangement in the west corridor." Kate hadn't even cleaned the west corridor that day. Mrs. Aldridge gave her a look, not of anger but of scrutiny. "This could be a misunderstanding," she said carefully. "But Miss Vanessa insists you be questioned in the presence of Mr. Barrett." That meant Christian's father. The office of Henry Barrett Sr. was a gallery of masculine legacy, walls lined with photographs from every generation of the Barrett dynasty, antique bookshelves, a desk large enough to command silence. Kate sat across from the man who'd once asked her indirectly to keep her distance from his son. She sat upright, poised. Christian was not present. Vanessa was. She crossed her legs slowly, face painted with a practiced expression of concern. "It's a shame, really. I wanted to believe she was different." Kate didn't flinch. "I didn't take your bracelet," she said, meeting Henry Barrett's eyes. "I have never stolen anything. I work with my hands. I pray with them. I use them to serve, not to steal." Henry didn't interrupt. His hands were folded on the desk, jaw set firm. Kate continued, "You don't have to believe me, but you can check my bag, my quarters, my entire record here. You will find nothing that stains my name." Silence. Vanessa exhaled dramatically. "So you're saying the bracelet just, what, grew legs and walked off?" Kate looked at her calmly. "Maybe it did what most lies do, find their way into the open eventually." The moment lingered. Then Henry spoke. "I've made my fortune reading people, and I know the difference between desperation and dignity." He stood, walked over to the butler and whispered something. Mr. Grant nodded and left the room. Then Henry turned to Kate. "You may go back to your duties. We're done here." The truth came out that evening. One of the kitchen staff, new, quiet, desperate for tuition money, had found the bracelet the day before and panicked. They hid it, afraid they'd be blamed. When confronted, the young girl tearfully confessed. Kate didn't gloat. She didn't throw blame. She simply nodded and said, "We all make mistakes. Let's just be honest about them next time." Mrs. Aldridge later told Kate, "You carried yourself like someone raised on truth. That matters more in this house than some of us admit." Later that week, Henry Barrett Sr. stood at the second-floor banister, a brandy in hand, watching the world below. The sun had started to set, casting golden rays through the tall windows of the main hall. From where he stood, he could see down into the rose garden, now more vibrant than ever since Kate had taken it upon herself to revive it. She was there again, gloves on, humming something quiet and warm, her head tilted as she examined a bloom that had just opened. "She's not like the others," Henry said, not realizing Christian had approached beside him. "She never was," Christian replied, keeping his gaze fixed on the garden. Henry didn't respond immediately. Instead, he sipped his drink, brows furrowed slightly. Not in anger this time, but in contemplation. "I watched her the other day," he said finally. "When she was accused, when that whole ordeal with Vanessa's bracelet happened, she didn't cry, she didn't protest loudly. But she didn't cower either." Christian's jaw tightened. "She shouldn't have had to defend herself at all." "No," Henry agreed. "But she did. And with more grace than I've seen from women with a dozen titles before their name." A beat passed. Henry set down his glass on the marble stand beside the railing and folded his arms. "I built this house, this company, this name. with the belief that dignity comes from power, but that girl, she carries a strength that doesn't need validation. Christian turned to his father, surprised by the softness in his tone. "You're saying you respect her?" Henry chuckled under his breath. "I'm saying I see her now, fully, and not just as a maid." Later that evening, Henry requested Kate bring tea to the library instead of the usual footman. It was a silent request, carried through the chain of staff, and when Kate stepped in, tray balanced perfectly, she didn't flinch at the sight of him sitting near the fireplace. He gestured to the table beside him. She set the tray down with the same quiet excellence she always carried. "I've never thanked you," Henry began, voice gravelly but sincere, "for how you handled that situation last week." Kate stood still, her hands folded before her. "You didn't have to thank me," she said, "but I appreciate your words." He nodded. "Do you always respond to life that way?" She thought a moment, then replied, "My mother used to say storms will come whether you're ready or not, so you'd better have peace that doesn't shake when they do." A silence fell between them, not uncomfortable, just full. Then Henry leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. "Where did you learn to carry yourself like that? It's not common, especially not in this house." "I come from South LA," she said gently. "I was raised by faith, by people who didn't have much, but what they did have, they held on to with integrity." Henry leaned back, letting her words sink in. And for the first time he didn't see a maid, he saw a woman of conviction. By the time she left the library that night, something had shifted. The walls that had once kept her outside the sphere of respect began to loosen their grip, and Henry Barrett Sr., a man not easily moved, found himself rethinking what it meant to be worthy of his family's legacy. The energy in the mansion shifted. It wasn't loud or obvious, no grand announcements, no bold declarations, but it was in the way glances lingered longer, how the murmurs behind Kate's back softened, and in the way some doors began to open a little quicker when she passed. A week after the accusation and her graceful defense, the household started noticing things they hadn't before, or perhaps had chosen to ignore. It began in the kitchen. Maribel, the chef, once skeptical of Kate's quietness, asked her if she could help shell peas while the pot simmered. Kate obliged, sliding off her gloves and jumping in with ease. The conversation was minimal, just enough to pass the time, but when she complimented the rosemary in the stew, Maribel offered a slight smile. "She's got good taste," the chef later muttered to one of the dishwashers. "Doesn't act like she's better than anyone, and doesn't grovel either." He had worked on the estate since before Christian went off to boarding school. Grizzled, silent, and protective of his tools, he rarely allowed anyone to assist him, especially not a maid. But after watching Kate prune the roses one afternoon with gentle care, he walked over without a word and handed her a bag of fresh compost. "You're feeding them wrong," he grunted. "Use this instead, twice a week." Kate looked up at him, surprised. "Thank you, sir." He gave a grumble of acknowledgement and walked away. Even Dolores, the oldest maid in the house, who once clutched her pearls at the mere idea of outsiders, softened. When she caught Kate returning from an errand with a sore ankle, she reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Sit a moment, dear, you've been on your feet all day." No gossip, no passive tone, just a small gesture that meant everything. Respect didn't always arrive in parades. Sometimes it showed up in hot tea left waiting for you after your shift. Sometimes it was a folded uniform done without being asked. Sometimes it was a door held open by someone who once shut it in your face. The biggest change came when one of the younger maids, Elena, approached Kate in the hallway with tears in her eyes. "I saw how they treated you," she whispered. "How you handled it. I don't think I could have stood that tall. But you did, and it gave me courage." Kate reached out and hugged her. No words. Just a deep, shared understanding between women often overlooked. Christian stood in his father's private office, gazing at the wall of black and white photographs, the men of the Delacroix family in tailored suits, toasting champagne at galas, cutting ribbons, shaking hands with governors. It was legacy, it was expectation, and lately, it was suffocating. Since the fundraiser incident and Kate's graceful handling of the false accusation, something had stirred in him. Something old, but finally waking. He found himself questioning the very circles he once revered, the stifling brunches, the sycophantic smiles, the unspoken rules that said who was worthy and who wasn't. That morning as he stepped into the Delacroix boardroom, he saw those polished faces through a new lens. The same men who cheered when Vanessa walked into the room, who looked down their noses at service staff unless they needed something. He sat at the mahogany table, nodded at the usual greetings but didn't say much. When one of the senior partners made a backhanded remark about Christian's recent distractions, he simply looked him in the eye and replied, "You don't know what you're talking about." Calm, measured, but firm. The family's social calendar had been filled for months. Christian used to attend it all. Black-tie dinners, wine tastings, charity balls. But lately, he declined invitation after invitation. Sometimes he claimed board obligations, other times he said nothing at all. He started spending more evenings in the conservatory instead, away from the clinking glasses and rehearsed pleasantries. Reading. Listening to old records, sometimes alone, other times, not. Vanessa noticed first. "You didn't come to Ambassador Klein's party," she remarked one day, lips tight with a forced smile. "Your mother was embarrassed." Christian shrugged. "I didn't feel like pretending I care." She blinked. "It's your family's reputation." He met her gaze. "Maybe that's the problem." He took the roles less and began driving himself around in a simple black SUV. He visited local businesses tied to the foundation and actually listened, something his father always assigned to a secretary. He canceled a networking retreat in Napa and instead showed up at a South LA neighborhood event Kate had mentioned weeks earlier, anonymously donating a small sum to help renovate a community center. He didn't tell anyone, not even Kate. One evening, he overheard a conversation between two executives at a restaurant, men who had always treated him like the golden heir. "Wasting time with help like her," one muttered over brandy. "She's not even our kind." Christian stood up, walked straight over to the table, and placed a $100 bill down. "For your drinks," he said quietly, "and a little something for your small minds." Then he left. The more he distanced himself from the elite circle, the more he felt free. He saw the cracks, the hypocrisies, the shallow love masked as legacy. He wasn't trying to make a statement, he was trying to breathe, and every step away from their expectations was a step closer to something honest. Something he glimpsed every time Kate looked at him, not with awe, but with clarity. That night, as he sat on the mansion's rooftop garden, he whispered aloud to the stars. "If this is what falling out of place feels like, maybe it's finally where I'm meant to be." Word had made its way through the staff quietly. Christian's father had spoken to her, alone. Rumors spread that he'd thanked her, even asked for her wisdom. In a house where class was a fortress, that was almost unheard of. Later in the break room, Kate found a note slipped under her bag. It read, "Strength isn't loud, you've shown us that. One of us." She folded it gently and placed it in her Bible, not for pride, but as a reminder that dignity, when carried consistently, changes the air around you, one heart at a time. The morning sunlight broke through the wrought iron trellis that arched over the once neglected rose garden. Dew shimmered on the thorny vines like tiny diamonds, each drop clinging to bruised petals and tired leaves, desperately holding on to life. Kate stood in the middle of it all, her gloved hands brushing aside crumbling mulch and faded blooms. The rose garden had been lifeless for years. Stories whispered through the estate said it once belonged to Christian's late mother, a space she adored, where she found peace. But since her passing, no one touched it, no one dared. Like a sacred graveyard of unspoken grief. But Kate saw something else, redemption, renewal, a quiet second chance. Each morning before her cleaning shift began, she devoted an hour to the forgotten plot. She replaced dead roots with fresh soil from the nearby nursery. She trimmed, watered, whispered prayers as she worked, gentle words like balm to wounded stems. It wasn't about roses, it was about finding meaning in broken things. About honoring life, even the parts the world turned away from. The other staff didn't understand at first. They watched from the windows and giggled behind kitchen doors. "Girl thinks she's the rose whisperer," one cook teased. "She's doing that for free?" another added. But Kate never explained herself. She didn't have to. Her healing was not for their applause. One afternoon, while kneeling by a particularly stubborn bush, her finger grazed a thorn. Blood welled up instantly. She sat back, wincing but refusing to curse. Instead, she wrapped the wound with her scarf, looking out at the slowly reviving buds. A soft wind danced through the petals, and for a fleeting second she felt her heart beat in rhythm with the soil. This garden, like her soul, had been abandoned, but it would bloom again. Not all miracles were loud. Some were quiet and rooted. By the end of the second week, the first rose unfurled, deep crimson, proud and defiant. Kate smiled, so did the earth. It was near sunset when Christian first approached. He had watched her for days from his study window, unsure of what drew him more, the gentle strength in her posture, or the silence in her work. This wasn't servitude. It was communion. One afternoon, without speaking, he stepped into the garden wearing rolled sleeves and casual jeans. A rare sight for the heir of the Delacroix legacy. Kate noticed his shadow before his voice. "I figured you could use an extra pair of hands," he said, holding up a trowel, unsure if he was offering or asking. Kate blinked, unsure what surprised her more, the gesture or the humility in his eyes. "I won't stop you," she replied with a smile, nodding to the row of uprooted plants. He knelt beside her, careful not to disturb the delicate roots she had tended. His movements were awkward at first, soil spilled, thorns scratched, but he didn't complain. Instead he listened, watched, learned. Their silence became its own kind of language. When Kate poured water over a young stem, he held the base steady. When she laughed at a worm crawling over his boot, he chuckled with a warmth that wasn't rehearsed. And when she wiped her brow with the back of her wrist, he offered a cloth, not as a master, but as a man who finally saw someone entirely. It became their rhythm. Not every day, but often enough. He stopped asking questions and simply followed her lead. He respected the garden's mood, understood its patience. Sometimes they worked in silence. Sometimes, she hummed soft hymns passed down from her grandmother. He never interrupted. He just stayed. The staff watched from afar. Whispers rose again. But this time, neither Kate nor Christian cared. Because in that garden, titles didn't matter. Only hands and hearts. One afternoon, as a breeze rustled the rose leaves and golden light bathed the mansion walls, Christian sat back on his heels, wiping dirt from his palm. "This garden's older than I am," he said. "My mother designed it herself, said roses taught her patience and forgiveness." Kate glanced at him, her eyes soft. She must have been wise. She was, and tired, of the parties, of pretending. Kate nodded, then sat beside him on the stone bench tucked under the arch. "You ever feel like you're living someone else's script?" she asked quietly. Christian exhaled. Every day, they spoke of family. Kate told him about her mother's gospel records, her father's silence, and the Sundays they never missed at St. Emmanuel's in South LA, even when the roof leaked and the pews creaked. She spoke of strength, of shame, of longing. Christian spoke of expectations, of learning to smile at people who criticized his every move, of missing his mother's quiet presence and dreading his father's next instruction. "I envy your roots," he whispered. "Even if they weren't perfect, they were real." Kate looked away, her voice low. "They still grounded me." The air grew cooler. Christian leaned forward, plucking a blooming rose. "Do you believe people can choose their legacy?" he asked. Kate smiled. "Only if they're brave enough to let go of the one others wrote for them." Their eyes met. Something passed between them, not romantic yet, not quite, but sacred. Like a shared breath in a world too loud. They laughed at stories, shared memories, planted seeds, not just in soil, but in trust. Each moment layered like petals, fragile, fragrant, impossible to forget. It happened in stillness. Not in music, not in heat, not in drama. But in the pause. They had just finished planting a new row. Dust clung to their shoes. A light drizzle had started, soft as whispers. Kate stood, brushing soil from her skirt, and Christian rose beside her. Their eyes met beneath the canopy of vines, wet leaves overhead, rose petals glistening at their feet. "I never liked roses," he said suddenly, surprising even himself. Kate raised an eyebrow. "No?" He shook his head. "Too perfect, too much, performance, and now?" He looked down, then back at her. "Now I see them as survivors." Kate smiled, a slow, quiet curve that didn't reach her lips, but went straight to his heart. He stepped closer, not rushed, not bold, just present. Their faces only inches apart. Not planned, not pushed. And then, gently, he leaned in. His lips met hers. No hunger, no claiming, just truth, like the rose's first bloom after winter. When he pulled away, his eyes searched hers, not for permission but for peace. Kate's gaze didn't waver. She didn't speak. But she didn't need to. The moment had spoken enough, and behind them, the rose garden stood in full color again. Alive. Just like them. The fireplace roared in the Delacroix private study. The smell of aged whiskey and pine-scented polish lingered in the air, as Christian stood tall before his father, no longer the uncertain heir, but a man forged through conviction. His father sat behind a massive oak desk, silver-rimmed glasses low on the bridge of his nose, reading figures from a quarterly report. But Christian didn't wait to be addressed this time. "I'm not here to discuss stock values," he began calmly, voice steady but strong. Mr. Delacroix looked up slowly, the weight of decades carved into the lines of his face. "Then why are you here?" Christian inhaled. "To talk about Kate." Silence. Only the crackling of fire filled the pause between them. "She's not a distraction," Christian continued. "She's not a phase. She's not an act of rebellion against this legacy you've tried to script." His father leaned back, skeptical. "She is the woman," Christian said, eyes unwavering, "who makes me want to be better. Not richer, not more powerful, just better." The elder Delacroix stared at his son for a long moment. "Do you understand what you're risking? Your seat on this board? Your inheritance? Your public image?" "I understand," Christian said. "And I'd rather be a man who loves with integrity than a puppet who performs for applause. You know how this world works. They'll tear her apart. And by extension—" Christian raised his hand, slightly, interrupting with respectful firmness. "They already tried, and she stood taller than most in this house ever have." The fire cracked louder, like punctuation. Mr. Delacroix set his glass down. "Then you've made your choice," Christian nodded. "I have." It wasn't a warm embrace. There were no blessings spoken aloud, but for the first time his father didn't argue, and that, in the Delacroix world, was a quiet sign of approval. Kate sat alone on the garden bench, the same one where the first kiss had bloomed under twilight. Her hands were coated in soil, but her mind was heavy with doubt. The weight of whispers had returned, only this time louder. The housemaids had become colder. The estate manager gave her fewer shifts. Some of the regulars at the grocery store in South LA stared too long, recognizing her from tabloid blogs that had begun swirling with half-truths. And worse, she had overheard one of the junior executives at the fundraiser mutter under his breath, "She cleans floors and now she's cleaning up with the heir?" It stung, not because it wasn't cruel, but because it reminded her of something deeper. She still saw herself as the help. Later that evening, while arranging flowers in the conservatory, she found herself facing her reflection in the arched glass. "Will I always be seen like this?" she whispered. "By them? By him?" Christian found her there, arms crossed, standing still as glass. "You're quiet tonight," he said gently. She didn't turn. "I've been thinking, what happens when the novelty wears off?" she asked, eyes fixed on her own reflection. "When I'm no longer the maid-turned-love interest and just a girl from South LA who doesn't belong in their world?" Christian stepped closer. "You've never just been a girl from anywhere," he said. "You're the woman who taught me how to listen, how to slow down, how to plant roots. That's never going to wear off." Kate turned to him slowly, tears threatening. "But what if I can't handle their world?" He cupped her face softly. "Then we'll build our own." It wasn't a magic fix. Doubt doesn't vanish in a single conversation. But in that moment, she saw her worth reflected not in his eyes, but in how firmly she stood despite the storm. Christian could have chosen the grand ballroom at the estate, a rooftop restaurant in Beverly Hills, or even a luxury resort in Napa. But he didn't. He chose the small community garden behind St. Emmanuel's Church. It was the same church Kate had mentioned in passing, where her mother sang in the choir and her aunt ran the weekend food bank. He called ahead, arranged with the pastor quietly. No cameras, no announcements, just love and intention. Kate's mother had tears in her eyes when she saw him walk into their modest living room that Saturday morning, holding sunflowers, Kate's favorite. He greeted everyone with respect, listened to her uncle's long stories, helped her little cousins fix the garden's broken bench, and when he asked for permission to speak privately to Kate in the backyard, no one raised an eyebrow. Mended soil, painted flower pots, graffiti walls now covered in murals by neighborhood kids. Kate stood beside the jasmine bush when Christian approached her, hiding nervous energy behind a crooked smile. "I wanted to do this here," he said, Because this is where your roots are, and I want to grow with you from this soil up." Her eyes widened, heart stilled. He pulled out a small velvet box, not flashy, just elegant. And then, without kneeling, without spectacle, he asked, "Kate, will you marry me?" Her hands flew to her mouth. Not because she didn't expect it, but because it was the most honest thing she'd ever felt. "Yes," she whispered, breathless. "Yes." Behind them the choir began practicing inside. Gospel chords floated through the air. It wasn't planned, but maybe it was perfect. The first headline read, "From Maid to Madame, Delacroix heir engaged to housekeeper." The second, "Scandal or Love Story. Christian Delacroix breaks elite norms." And the third, shared by a gossip influencer with 2 million followers, "She scrubbed her way into the family fortune." Kate stared at the screen in disbelief. The engagement had only been announced 3 days ago, and already her name was a trending topic, not for her integrity, not for her resilience, but for her occupation. She turned off her phone. She didn't need validation from strangers, but it still hurt. At the estate, reactions were divided. Some staff, like the elderly groundskeeper, clapped her on the back and called her the new lady of the house. Others walked past her as if she were invisible. Vanessa, of course, had already updated her social media with cryptic quotes about dodging bullets and women who settle. Even Mr. Delacroix didn't offer congratulations, but he didn't object either. Christian stood firm. He addressed the board, reaffirming his commitment to the company and clarifying that his engagement had no bearing on business decisions. He told press politely, "She's not a statement. She's my partner." And slowly, public opinion began to tilt. Not because Kate tried to explain herself, but because she didn't. She walked with grace. She volunteered at her old church. She declined interviews. She smiled quietly in the grocery aisles she used to clean. And in time, the world began to see what Christian already knew. This wasn't a Cinderella tale. It was a love story built on soil, not sparkle. Beneath the canopy of a clear Los Angeles sky, Kate stood alone in the revived rose garden. A gentle breeze ruffled her cardigan as she looked over the petals she had once nurtured from decay. Each bloom whispered a memory. Each leaf held a page of her story. There had been so many turning points. The girl from South LA, invisible in a mansion of marble, had become the woman who held a man's heart in a world that hadn't seen her coming. She remembered the first time she walked into the Delacroix estate. Her shoes had holes, her dignity was intact but bruised. The staff had looked through her, as if she were just part of the wallpaper. And Christian, he hadn't even been in town. She was just the help, another quiet hand in a lineage of quiet labor. But she had stayed rooted. Not because of ambition, but because she needed the job. And over time her work ethic bloomed just like this garden. Quiet, constant, refusing to wilt. Christian's journey had bloomed too. From aloof son of the CEO to a man slowly shedding performance and pretense. She recalled the first fundraiser, how Vanessa had flung insults with veiled smiles, and how Christian had watched Kate carry herself like a storm in stillness. It wasn't a fairy tale, it was a slow awakening. His admiration came in whispers, not grand declarations. And then came the conservatory, the music, the books, the confession of dreams. Kate's voice fragile but brave, revealing how her deepest ambition wasn't fame, but a life lived with purpose. Vanessa's betrayal had been painful, but necessary. Sometimes truth requires a crack to enter through. Christian had chosen not the safe path, but the sincere one. And when he stood beside Kate, publicly, firmly, everything changed. There had been setbacks. His father's initial disgust, the estate's judgment, the public skepticism, Kate's own doubt, but love, when sincere, doesn't perform, it perseveres. Now Kate placed a single sunflower in the center of the garden, their symbol, not for luxury, but for light, and growth, and unyielding roots. The church was old, tucked between 2 blocks of mural-covered buildings in South LA. Its walls were worn, but its spirit was unshakable. It wasn't part of the elite circuit. There were no private pews or valet service, just folding chairs, gospel hymns, and a warmth you couldn't fake. Kate hadn't been back since the engagement announcement. She wasn't avoiding it, just trying to preserve something sacred from the noise. But today she returned, with Christian beside her. They entered just before the third hymn. Heads turned, not in judgment, but in curiosity. Christian wore jeans and a simple button-down, trying not to look out of place. Kate wore a floral dress her aunt had sewn. No heels, no makeup, just peace. Her mother waved them over. Her aunt made space in the second row. When the choir began to sing Blessed Assurance, Christian closed his eyes, not because he knew the words, but because he felt them. During the sermon, the pastor didn't reference fame or wealth. He spoke about dignity, about choosing the narrow road, about the cost of sincerity. And as Christian reached for Kate's hand, she didn't pull away. She leaned in. They weren't just worshiping. They were grounding their future on something deeper than headlines. After service, older women hugged Kate with pride. The youth group leader pulled Christian aside, teasing him gently about holding down our girl. Kate's cousin gave him dap and whispered, "If you mess up, the whole block's watching." It wasn't a threat. It was love. And for the first time, Christian felt rooted in a community, not just a company. They didn't need paparazzi to capture this moment. They didn't need designer clothes. They left that church with hearts full. Because in the house of God, sincerity wasn't questioned. It was honored. Mr. Delacroix rarely left his estate for anything unrelated to business. So when he appeared at the South LA engagement celebration Kate's family hosted in their community center, people noticed. He didn't arrive with a security team. Just a driver, and a gaze that still pierced like glass. Kate had not expected him, neither had Christian. But there he was, tall, proud, and completely out of place amidst potluck tables and folding chairs. Christian approached cautiously. "You came," he said. His father adjusted his cufflinks. "I said I'd give you my silence, not my absence." Christian exhaled. "You didn't have to." "I did." Kate watched from across the room, a bowl of macaroni in her hand, unsure whether to approach. Her mother nudged her. "Go. It's your life now." She stepped forward slowly. Mr. Delacroix turned to her. For a moment neither spoke. Then he extended his hand, purposeful. Kate took it. It wasn't warm, but it was deliberate. "I judged too quickly," he said. "That's not your fault, but it is my regret." Kate blinked. He continued, "You carry yourself with grace. It's not the name that makes someone worthy, it's how they hold it." A pause. "I see now. You don't diminish this family, you dignify it." Kate's breath caught, but she nodded, calm. "Thank you, sir." He nodded once and moved away, leaving her holding not just his hand, but the respect she'd earned through nothing but sincerity. Christian watched from the corner, pride swelling in his chest. His father had never said "I'm sorry." But in Delacroix language, this was better. The wedding was held where it all began. Not in the ballroom, not at a vineyard, but in the rose garden. The same space Kate had restored from decay. Now blooming with color, it had become more than a garden. It was a testimony. Rows of wooden chairs lined the lawn, white lace fluttered in the breeze. The scent of sunflowers, roses, and jasmine filled the air. There was no orchestra, just a local jazz quartet, no royal train. Kate wore a satin gown, elegant but unpretentious. Christian wore a charcoal suit, no tucks, no excess. The guests were mixed. Some board members came reluctantly, others came sincerely. The Delacroix staff, those who once whispered, now smiled freely. Many wept. Kate's cousins joked loudly. Her aunt led the catering. Her mother sang the hymn as she walked down the aisle, and when she reached Christian, her hand in his, the wind fell still. "I never thought I'd find love in a place where I felt invisible," Kate said, voice soft but steady. "But sincerity has a way of turning hidden hearts into home." Christian smiled, eyes glassy. "You never changed for me," he replied. "And that's why I changed for you. No gold chandeliers, no viral footage, just vows under a tree, and cheers that echoed far beyond social status." As they danced beneath string lights, Christian whispered, "We started in the shadows, but you lit the path." Kate leaned into his chest. "And now we walk it together. In a world of performance, theirs was a quiet anthem, not perfect, but pure, not dramatic, but deeply true. Because sincerity was everything, and they had chosen it together.